As Donald Trump prepares to move into the White House, he's not only going to have to figure out who's going to be in his cabinet, but what does he do about all those businesses that he owns? The president-elect has a stake in more than 500 companies, both here at home and abroad as well. That's more than anyone else ever elected to the highest office in the land. Trump's indicated that he plans to let his 3 oldest children run his empire while he runs the country. But is this enough to calm some concerns about the conflicts of interest his presidency poses? Let's talk to CNN legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Laura Coates now. So, Laura, first of all, let's get to his decision to allow his children, to hand those businesses over to his children. Is that the smartest thing, the wisest thing for him to do, when we also know that they are playing some sort of role in the transition efforts?
Well, this is an election that has already told us that our normal rules of etiquette and what constitutes as being smart has been thrown out the window. There is nothing that's legally binding or legally preventing them from doing just that. So perhaps it would be prudent for him to remain, have his companies remain with people who he feels are loyal to him, which has been a constant theme through the course of his campaign. But remember, back in the JFK era, we put in place certain provisions to say we couldn't have nepotism when it came to the appointments in federal office. Having a member of your transition team is very different and does not violate our long-standing tradition of not wanting to have nepotism be very ingrained in Washington, D.C.
Okay, so let me ask you this. His brand, the Trump brand, it could be elevated, it could be devalued based on some of the actions he does or in some cases does not take. How would you advise him in that regard, and what parameters are out there to, say, govern him in that regard?
Sure. Well, you know, one of the biggest things about this is the issue of conflicts of interest. He is somebody, as you've already articulated, has extensive reach in the global market. And frankly, we as a society have already told our federal employees and federal government workers that, look, we do not want you to have conflicts of interest that will impede or interfere with your right or your ability to be able to be, fair and objective. Well, we exempted the president and the vice president of the United States from those sorts of federal conflict of interest laws because we wanted to be able to have those politicians govern without any type of restraint. Having said that, even though there's no federal law or impediment to having these sort of conflicts, in terms of optics, which is very, very important in our democracy, frankly, whether we like to admit it or not, we do not want our president or the vice president to have such ties where we believe that there is a hint of impropriety or that they're not going to be able to judicially govern this country and fairly do it without having a selfish interest. And so I would advise him to cut ties with the organizations that would encourage other organizations in other countries to believe that he will not be able to be objective and will not be able to act in anything but his own business self-interest.
So let me ask you this, because he's mentioned many times on the campaign trail, this is a man who is under audit. A man, and that's why he didn't release his tax returns and has been under audit for years. Now he's in a position where he can appoint people to oversee those very departments that are in charge of his audit. Help us understand how that is going to filter out.
Well, he will have to file a new financial disclosure. I know we're all been waiting throughout the course of the election and the campaign for even a modest tax return to be presented to the people. But really, he has to now have a different financial path in terms of what he is disclosing to the public. And you're right, there is the hint of there being a conflict of him being able to oversee organizations that are auditing him. But remember, the Trump corporation is going to be different than the Mr. Trump individually. And so we do have a long-standing tradition in our country of not having our seated presidents being able to be indicted and also able to be somebody who's criminally charged. And so he is going to experience a level of immunity that other people would not expect him to have if he was a civilian or a layman in this world. So we're going to have to see going forward what his financial data actually presents and whether or not that's going to have an impact on his ability to really be an objective governing president.
You mentioned the immunity, but we should point out there is no immunity for him in these, I think it's 75 plus lawsuits that he is involved in some capacity based on what has happened, what he's been involved with prior to entering the White House. So he is still vulnerable in that regard to those lawsuits.
He is. And the irony of that is this was one of the main parts that people were fearing about having Hillary Clinton be in office, the idea that we'd have this constant regurgitation of litigation against her while she was actually in office. However, there is certain immunities that are applying to a president of the United States who is seated. And so we're not going to see, I don't predict, even if he is still vulnerable, we're not going to see the landslide of litigation that's going to undermine his ability to remain seated unless there's something that's criminal being prosecuted against him, which those are civil lawsuits, not criminal lawsuits.
Very good point to make. Laura Coates, thank you so much for walking us through it. We appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you.